then we start with the official portion of the show. Welcome to the 124th edition of I want to say Quarkus of airhacks TV. This is the July edition of 2024, and I learned right now that in India it's 3 hours later. So kudos to Siddharth for staying longer than we actually. So and right away to the very first question. So I got some excellent questions, but the questions are Java EE related. So somehow someone migrated or has to migrate. This is the Mr. Nilsker has to migrate from, it seems like, from old EJBs to Jakarta 10 or even 11. And he asked interesting questions. And what's stunning that the code later is hyper-modern Java. So it's like, he spent some time thinking about how to migrate from maybe 20 years old code, or 15 to 20 years, I would say, if we take a look at the questions, to Java 22. So it seems like. Okay, so first, stateful EJBs can be passivated. So what means passivate? So back then, you had an EJB, you could have EJB activate and passivate, two hooks, two methods. And the idea was similar to AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, actually right now, somehow similar. Now the Lambdas or Azure Functions get killed, and back then the idea was that the EJBs, the state of stateful session beans can be serialized on disk to save RAM. This was the entire thing. And I asked me, is it considered useful? My answer, immediate answer would be only if you have problems with RAM, right? Because if you don't have problems with RAM, serialization and deserialization is costly, means it costs you CPU, so it is slow. And I remember that you could even hack a server, because what you could do is you can create a lot of sessions, and then until some of the sessions are going to be passivated, and then you could call the older sessions, and they would be activated again. But there will be not enough room for the newer sessions, and they will be passivated, so you can create some additional load on the server back then. Okay, so this is not that useful. So conversation scope is also not that useful. It is actually useful if you're building sophisticated UI applications, server-side applications. What conversation scope means is you can have sub-sessions inside a session. And I think the idea back then was you could have, hotel booking and flight booking, like two independent sessions, and switch between them back and forth. So session scope, also very rare, because the session scope and the conversation scope, they are implying you have a kind of a session ID, which is sent back and forth. And with that, you get trouble in the cloud, or not trouble, at least you will have to configure the load balancer, that the load balancer redirects, the load based on the session ID. That's the problem. So, and request scoped would be the best one, or application scope, because interestingly, request scoped and application scope both are stateless. Stateless means there is no session. It means also that on every request you will have to serialize and deserialize your state, or persist your state in a persistent storage. So this is now my answer. And if you would like to have this, there is nothing to put on it right now, because whatever you do, it will be wrong, because the idea would be this should be request scoped, and this should be loaded from a database or somewhere on every request. It might sound slow, and it is of course slower than accessing the memory, but on AWS, for instance, the access to a S3 bucket will cost you 30 milliseconds. So you can very easily deserialize the map to a JSON object, and DynamoDB is single-digit milliseconds. So this is faster than 10 milliseconds, and so it is absolutely doable, actually. Not actually, it is doable. Okay, pooling. Pooling is more useful. But I mean, interestingly, most of my applications are fast enough without pooling, but where pooling really makes a difference. So I used the polyglot Graal features a lot in projects, and then you have to load the entire language context somehow. And with EJBs, you could pool the entire language context because it is not multi-threaded. Without EJBs, you have to load it on every call, which is really slow. Yeah. So instead, back then, I measured the difference between EJBs and CDI, and EJBs, stateless EJBs with pooled injected classes were 20-30% faster than request scoped. So stateless, if you would really like to be safe and you have to migrate, I'm replacing stateless with request scoped and transactional, both two annotations CDI. You could also replace stateless with application scoped. But then you be careful because several threads will meet in one single instance. Okay, so this is parts and wheel assembler. Exactly, this was what we discussed right now. And the problem is, if you do something like this, the question is, do the wheels and window and door belong to one request, or are they global? If they are global, this could be application scoped, but then you will have to use, how it's called, concurrent hash map. And in the case of list, I forgot the name, is this one, I think it's called skip list. This is concurrent skip list. And the most popular one, I forgot the name. There is a concurrent list implementation. One is concurrent list, skip list, which is lesser known, but there's a concurrent implementation. Okay, we will find it out with Javadoc. Javadoc concurrent list implementation. Reject. Oh. So, weiter, no weiter. So, concurrent list, where are concurrent linked queue? Exactly. Concurrent linked queue is the most popular one, and there is one with concurrent skip list, I think. Yeah. So you will have to use concurrent, either you will have to lock, which is problematic, or use concurrent data structures. But in your particular case, so if you put here request scoped, this cannot be global, so it will be loaded on, for instance, post construct. You could load it from somewhere, or you need the parameters then per user. So this would be only the cache. So having request scope beans with global affiliates and usually you could have then, this could be variables inside a method. Okay, window assembler. This could be request scoped, I think, because it is, this could be request scoped. And parts, where are the parts? Here are the parts. Yeah, you are. The problem with your design is you are assuming you will keep everything in memory, but usually in real world, this wheel, window, and whatever will usually come from a database and then looks differently. But if you really would like to keep everything in memory, then this could be dependent. For instance, everything could be dependent, and you can decide in the very first class what is it. So this could be request scoped, and then all injected classes would be request scoped, for instance. So separation of entity and beans. So, and entities and EJBs are never mixed, I have to say. This is what I don't got here. The only thing, as the code is really nice and clean, but what I don't get is why you are even mentioning this, because this is the entity. And what I don't get, why the wheel implements part. But the part was here request scoped. So you are right. I mean the entity, the entities are not request scoped, are not application scoped, are nothing scoped, right? And the entities are going to be identified by an ID. This is the primary key. This is the only scope. If you delete the primary key, the entity is gone. So for me, entities are more like singletons, which are global and user independent. And if you have an entity with one and only primary key, you have a singleton, basically. So, and in your case, it cannot be that the wheel is and part, which is request scoped and entity at the same time. So what you're mixing a bit is usually part, wheel, or whatever would be entities, and you will have to like a gate or accessor or whatever you like to call it, a class which manages wheels, the wheeler, right? The wheeler is the class which manages wheels, and the wheeler would be request scoped, and what it does, it gets the username, goes to database, and fetches all wheels for the user, for instance. And a wheel action could be either an entity, we say, okay, I configure all the actions up front, or if it's not an entity, then the action role would be request scoped or application scoped. So it means all actions or classes, or think this way, if you are a C programmer, whatever methods you have, here, roll and persist and fetch, register actions, all static methods would be request scoped or application scoped, and the parameters of the methods are entities and they have no scope. This is basic, I would say. Hopefully it's understandable. And this with stateless this is dangerous, because what you're doing here, if this is stateless are not scoped. It means for every injected actions, you get an instance of the action, and they will live as long the stateless instance live, and we have no idea how long it is, because the EJBs, the instances can get destroyed, and when they are destroyed, it's on exception. So, okay, so now back to chat. What are your typical use cases using GraalVM in your apps? My typical use case is I like to use GraalVM for more complicated or more useful or stuff which I use more frequently, command line interface applications. So I tend to compile with GraalVM my tool. And one which I remember is called Erase. I don't think even I ever announced that. Eraser. Or I announce it. I don't even know. So what Eraser is a tool which deletes buckets, and exactly. So it ships with native build, and I have one binary which I put in path, and I can use it. It's more convenient for me than, I don't even have to install Java. So Eraser is one of such tools. I use it frequently. It is able to recursively delete buckets with all dependent objects. So, or I use GraalVM for polyglot. So I can, for instance, very easily load JavaScript to Java and use JavaScript in Java. But I don't use currently GraalVM to run my applications in production, because right now all my projects are serverless. On a serverless project, and GraalVM is exactly not serverless, so there's the opposite idea. If I would use GraalVM, I would have to care about the image, and in serverless, I don't have to care only about the business logic. Pulling the context, what I meant is, if you go to polyglot GraalVM and you load the JavaScript, then it is slow the first time, and you can reuse it. But you can only reuse it per GraalVM polyglot JavaScript. So GraalVM is highly Language reference is highly, how to call it, language, it supports many languages, and polyglot programming, and you will find here somewhere, polyglot eval, but the beginning is you have to load the language context, and this is slow. It had nothing to do with application scope. So the multilingual polyglot GraalVM has nothing to do. Yeah, this is not the new Java type, but usually you would load the entire thing and pass parameters, and the loading the entire thing to context takes time. Okay, so eraser covered. Podcasts. Some interesting podcasts, and one episode is the published yesterday even, is about implementation of JVector. This is the vector database in pure Java, and with Java 21 and even Java 22, and why Java 22 could be 50% faster than Java 21. But the interesting point is, another question in the or comment in this podcast was whether why no. I mean, the question, I will read it soon, but the question was whether Java is used for database programming. And in this podcast, Jonathan actually was in favor of using Java, because they say with Java we can have the most scalable implementation. So you cannot use Snapstart without versions. If you use Snapstart in AWS Lambda, you have to use versions, which is a bit annoying, I know, but you can do it with CDK. But it takes longer. And you could use Snapstart. You get a similar effect. It's not a similar effect, but you get a startup performance improvement. So. And around the corner, there are two workshops. One is on July the 11th, so it is in 2 weeks, I think. It's crazy. And the next one is end of July. And one I will do persistence, but not JPA, more like, NoSQL, Postgres, and DynamoDB, and more sophisticated DynamoDB, one-to-end relations and how to deal with them, for instance. And the serverless is more like enterprise AI project. So, but back to questions. So, what happened? There was a nice conference called Geekon, and I was invited, and the talk was semi-published. So I was allowed in the email to share with small audience. So I guess you are small audience. So if you like, you can watch it. And during the talk, I got interesting questions, and we can walk through the questions because they're interesting. So what I did, I shown how to use serverless, and they asked me, why is Kubernetes recommended in private data center but not in public cloud? So they asked me because I said that in the talk. And my answer was, because if you're running Kubernetes in public cloud, you have now two clouds, the Kubernetes cloud and the public cloud, and you have to care about both clouds. Is maybe what I said is a similar situation as 5 years ago, where people run Spring inside Java EE containers. Also never got the idea why. Why one should not Maven clean exactly. So, so I cleaned, I programmed the entire time, develop an application, and I use clean a bit. And so I also know Maven committers, and they don't like the idea that I'm cleaning too much, because they say the plugin should be written this way, that cleaning must not be necessary. And then he asked me, okay, I deployed a serverless Java function zip, and they asked me what's inside, and my answer was just zipped Java classes, nothing else. Then asked me why I use Maven, not Gradle. My answer was Maven is faster and simpler, and I don't need programming features, so this is why I use Maven. But if you would like to experiment, take a look at BLD, for instance, a nice building tool. And then they asked me why I'm not building lambdas as Quarkus native image, and my answer was, if I would do this, I will have to create the image in my responsibility and then push it to the cloud. Whereby if I use stock Corretto or Microsoft OpenJDK, for instance, then I just upload my business logic, and Java is maintained by the cloud provider. So there is nothing to do. So there's separation of duties or responsibilities. And usually the pure Java is fast enough, so there is no need for optimization. And also this depends on cloud provider, but on AWS Lambda, you have to buy usually one CPU to be reasonably fast. If you would like to have one CPU, it ships with 1.7 gigs of RAM. So you have to buy 1.7 gig of RAM to get one CPU, and this is a plenty for Lambda. And they asked me which Visual Studio Code plugins I used. So I used Visual Studio Code, and the answer was, it's also in my shorts, in my channel, but nothing fancy. I'm using the stock Microsoft Java plugins, which are the same as Red Hat with better testing. And I also had, I think, installed the AWS toolkit, which with that you can look at log files, for instance. And okay, they asked me how to manage multiple environments. So this was serverless application. They asked me how to manage serverless environments. And my answer is it's already a solved problem, because if you are serverless, you could have multiple AWS accounts or Azure subscriptions, and you can deploy exactly the same application multiple times, because it doesn't cost you anything. So it is free. How to share S3 information with another project, for example, Lambda. And what I answer is there are multiple possibilities. You can use, for instance, environment variables from Lambda. So you can use CDK and inject the configuration to the Lambda, or you can from Lambda access system manager parameter store. Another question, how are you versioning and deploying the app for green blue deployment? And my answer was, this happens already for you. If you ship a Lambda, it is already green blue deployed. So nothing gets destroyed until the Lambda is successful. And you can even have true green blue deployment with, users percentage. You can say the first version has to get, or the old version has 90% of traffic, and the new version should start with 10% of traffic. Now, I'm a backend developer. To be honest, your code doesn't look very professional. This is possible, but right now, this was not my code. This was the code from, and I like this code. So I would say this code, this is what I really, I like this style of coding, but it was not my code. It was from Liska. And in this workshop, or in this session, in this session, I didn't written any code. But the question is, what is professional? I like this style. What I would even do here, I would remove the private. It's pointless, for instance, right? So I would even make it leaner here. So is it professional? I don't even know what professional means. So interesting airhacks TV question, right? What does it mean to write when your code is professional? This would be an interesting question, right? What is professional code, for instance? Okay, now I think, by the way, I'm also backend developer, so I would say 90% of my time is spent in the backend. Now, look back 8 years ago, 24th edition of airhacks, and the question is, which questions were asked? And so, funny, is Java EE dying 8 years ago? And I say, actually not, because 8 years later, the first question was, how to migrate it to Jakarta EE 10 or 11, which is the successor of Java EE. So, and then cross-component business transactions and BCE. This is boundary control entity, which I still use. And these cross-component business transactions, it works without any problems. You can have a boundary and inject multiple classes from different components, and it will just work, no problem. So web jars, I think it is hidden, but still used in projects like Vardin, I guess. I forgot to look it up. Web jars Vardin. Yes. So web jars are still used, and what web jars is, you can use Node.js the Java way. So Node.js dependencies as or JavaScript dependencies as jars. This is the idea, and yeah, an 8 years old idea. But Mafioso, I think, what we should do, we should keep your question for the next airhacks TV, because I have too many questions right now. But the question would be really, what makes my code professional? This would be interesting. So what to look, at to see professional code. It's an interesting discussion, really. I like the question. So, but I lost my tab. No, it's here. Oh, these were the origin questions from 2016. So if you're interested, there's the entire trail. But I would like, exactly, WebGL location in Quarkus, but I know it's from Vaadin, but also Quarkus supports that. So, back to questions. We go here. Or getters and setters, yeah, maybe. And also, Jan, you have default constructor with a Java doc. This is a default constructor with an empty super. This is one of my favorites. But I wouldn't see this would be completely unprofessional. It's just us kidding here, of course. But so where I was, time machine, right? So we are already on the bottom, and so content negotiation. So I still use it from time to time. The idea, what is a content negotiation? The idea in jax-rs would be you have produces something, produces annotation, application JSON, and you can have multiple methods in your jax-rs with different jax-rs produces. And if you from client you say I would like to have my wheels as JSON, so you get JSON back, and if there's a wheels as CSV, you get CSV back. Concurrency, stateless session beans, and throttling. Important point. So it was not mentioned by an Filsk, I think. So cool feature of EJBs was you could set the max pool size, and what you got was bulkheads for free. So you can say EJB is 50, and there will be never more than 50 concurrent requests to this EJB. Okay, runtime pluggability, I would say, is dead, right? Because no one tries even to enhance running system. I would say immutable infrastructure, I think, is the thing which I also believe means we just move forward and deliver new versions. Groovy-based DSL from configurability, I think no. What I like is just property files, key value pairs, very simple. In rare cases, maybe JSON. What I try to avoid is YAML. Also interesting, caches in crippled network environments. So what was cache can become stale. So my basic advice is never cache until you really need it. So usually you get surprised how good the performance is without any caching. So I'm only adding caching after measuring the difference. Also, DAOs, entities, CRUD, and duplications. Of course, this was back then it was huge. Everything had to be and DAO with interface, sometimes even factories and abstract DAOs. Now we have one class with injected whatever S3 client, entity manager, or whatever you're using. So there is no need for encapsulation. So by the way, I think there are two ways, to create great apps. Create great apps. One is try, or if you have a problem with supporting multiple implementations, you have, of course, to decouple or abstract from things. But there are two strategies, and they are the exact opposite at the spectrum, right? The one is try to encapsulate and be never depending on implementation, and the other one is to write, as little or as lean code as possible, and don't care and just use the implementation and write simple code. And if you have to migrate, then you don't have to migrate a lot because there is no waste. There are no indirection. So ears are dead, but CDI in war just works. Portlets, I think, are no more used, right? So annotation-based configuration is normal. So I write code like add inject config property name default value every day or almost every day. Managing common data with REST. This was like, you would like to expose the master data via a microservice. Could be a good idea. Streams versus old collections, I would say I use streams all the time. Sometimes they can be slower, but I would say streams are far more readable. And one thing what I see, which is not professional now, this is the first thing, professional code, what I can tell you. If you have a multi-line lambdas in streams, you do map and then you have 5 lines of code. It is hard to read. It is hard to debug. And it is really hard to unit test that. So I will move it out to a method and use method reference. For instance, this will be for me professional. Why professional? Maybe professional means to me, professional code would mean is I'm a professional, so I will have to look and use the code several times. If I use the same code several times, it should be easy to set the breakpoint and should be easy to write a test. So this will be the first, right? The first indicator what is professional code. So DAO, in your opinion, is this is behind the heart, so I cannot read it. In a simple necessary, I think I would say DAO is never necessary. If this is the question, okay. How to deal with abstract classes in BCE? I try to avoid abstract classes. They are rare in request-response applications. So interfaces are more common. But if you would like to write an abstract class, you can just put it to control package or to boundary package. No difference to usual structuring. And this is the very last question. And this is the question to the podcast. Adam, do you think Java is losing space in the development of database engines? I think so. So because now it is no more modern to use Java to implement databases. Everyone uses Rust, almost everyone, except the creator of Cassandra, who says, okay, JVector and Cassandra are that fast because Java makes it scalable. And it's really hard to implement the same in C++ or Rust. So this was, but listen to the podcast. There was, I would say, an interesting discussion. What do you see in Java development that will remedy this? I would say this is fashion. You can do nothing against that, right? So this is like, wait a sec. What was before Java? There was C++. Okay, there were reasons to migrate to Java, and everyone migrated to Java. So I would say if you were in C++ project 1998, the project was killed and you had to migrate to Java. But now I would say C and C++ is back, right? So if you take a look at language index, C and C++ is back, and not really back. So what means is we can. There's also Rust and Go, but I would say Go is almost out of fashion, right? So all the new stuff is implemented in Rust. So I would say I expect, that everything which is infrastructure is going to be implemented in Rust the next few years until the next thing happens. Maybe it is Java or something else, but from technical perspective, there are great databases written in Java. I would assume half of Amazon and even Azure is written in Java. Right, Minecraft was written in Java. It's not a database exactly, but I would say somehow similar, to keep the persistence of the entire world somewhere. Then Cassandra was written in Java. The Zookeeper was written in Java. DerbyDB was written in Java and was even DB2 compatible. And I never heard that they perform bad, right? So this is, I would say, fashion. And what you can do, right? So if you start a project, I would say, if you are what I'm thinking is, if you are already you have Java knowledge, there is no reason to pick a different language. So because Java can deliver of scalability. Of course, if you are you only working with Rust developers, right? So they should not, relearn to use just Java, because I think they can also implement something sensible in Rust. So this is my personal opinion. So thank you for watching, and if you like, join the airhacks live. And by the way, I'm thinking about delivering maybe one at Munich airport in December, because I got lots of requests when the airhacks will return to Munich airport, and I can actually do it. And what I thought is maybe that I will do one session twice, one online and one on premise on the airport, and maybe even allow the airport attendees also to attend the online part and then ask better questions or whatever. So just thinking what to do, but this would be in winter. Hopefully there will be less to do. Java is crazy, Java project right now. So necessary. Okay, now I see this. Thank you that eliminated the heart here. So so on that note, and the shorts are doing really well. So there is a daily short where I write code, not a backend code, and also not professional code, I think, but it is not that much. Being Adam, and this is shorts, I think, shorts or short, and either shorts or short, and these are shorts, and it is interesting, but some shorts are really popular overnight. Like there was one about integer overflow. I would never think that this can be that popular, and people were stunned that there are no exceptions. And other are more interesting and not that popular. So it's interesting to watch and know what is popular and what not popular. But at least one thing, there's an interesting JAP. And this JAP is about, this 293, is about how to write command line, or how to name command line parameters for CLIs. So interesting part. So you can steal some inspiration. So on that note, see you next month. Almost in autumn, right? So time flies. And yeah. Thank you and bye.